Oh, really? So, yeah. I just went down to your board.
Right. Are you editing these? Nice to teach. Editing?
No worries. Switching orders.
Oh, okay. We're gonna
It's coming. I have one bite at my lunch. That's good.
We had a water closet.
And- yeah.
I did.
Now go back to
Close enough, close enough.
Oh,
That's great. And it's weird, like.
Well, no, that's.
Yeah.
and then,
Oh, yeah, yeah.
from there,
No, that's.
Okay, thank you, everybody, for showing up today. Obviously, we've got a lot of really big, important things that we're trying to address here in the nation's capital. I want to thank the press for showing up, show your interest and share this information with the general public. I want to thank the Senate for accommodating us and joining us in this important issue today. And I want to thank my colleagues from the House who have been talking about this for quite some time. The two biggest issues that face our nation right now, the two largest threats that face our nation right now are the amount of debt at $34 trillion and the absolutely open southern border. They both are posing not just financial burdens, but national security threats that are real. We've been trying to address the problems since Biden took office, and they continue to get worse. We've had record amounts of illegals that have been entering our country, both those that have been detected and had encounters with law enforcement, and the several million that have come in without even making an encounter with law enforcement, which creates a grave danger. The law enforcement officials down on the southern border no longer call this an immigration problem. They call it a slave trade problem. I've talked to them personally. Every single person that comes into this country illegally has got a financial obligation to pay to the cartel, and they are being forced into slavery and servitude for years to come. We've got fentanyl problems. 100,000 a year deaths, somewhere between 70 and 100,000 a year deaths from fentanyl. We know it's coming in from the Mexican border. We know that the components are coming from China. That boils down to about 350 people a day. If we had a large jet go down with 350 victims inside of it, the United States government would ground those aircraft. We saw them ground aircraft last week because a door blew off, and fortunately, we never lost a soul. But if 350 deaths a day were taking place, they certainly would. And yet, they turned the other way. We've got terrorists that are entering our country. Last week, before the House of Representatives went down to Eagle Pass, there were 10,000 illegals that had been herded up together. And I talked to CBP, and they said that there were 200 people of special interest that were amongst that group. They were trying to get additional information. They wanted to vet them. They wanted to find out where they came from and what they were planning to do once they got into our country. And they were whisked away and distributed around our country, just like the other 10,000 remaining illegals were. Again, this is an imminent national security threat, and at the same time all of that is taking place, we have cartels that are being enriched. In the Del Rio sector alone, they're making roughly $32 million a week off of that slave trade that this administration has been supporting. This is our obligation. Everybody swore to uphold and defend the Constitution. And the largest obligation that we have as members of Congress is to secure our nation. We're not doing it. But this is our opportunity to do so right now, when these two major issues come together, where you have funding that is necessary for large parts of the government and a policy matter that is compromising our national security. And that's why this group has got together and said, we're not going to spend additional funding for the federal government until we can see our border secure. And that's either going to be in the form of passage of H.R. 2, which is in the Senate right now, or a multitude of other immigration policies that I will be introducing tomorrow. Again, we've got a large group here. Everybody has something very important to say, and then we'll take some questions at the end. Right now, I would like to bring up my very good friend from Florida, Senator Rick Scott. Thank you.
So I want to thank my friends from the House and from the Senate for being here today. We have a lawless administration. Let's just all admit it. When Trump was president, the border was pretty secure. We have a new president, the border is unsecure. It wasn't that the laws didn't change. We have the exact same laws. We have an administration that has decided not to enforce the law. So we have drugs all across the country. We have criminals. We have terrorists. And we had Director Wray come and testify. He testified in Homeland Security when I asked him a question. And Mayorkas was sitting right next to him. As a result of an open southern border, do we have terror cells in this country? And he said yes. I think every one of us care about our families. Every one of us cares about our families. I mean, do we want terrorists in our country? Do we want more crime in our country? Do we want more drugs in our country? And this administration is doing it. They're doing it each and every day. So what we have to do is we have to take every opportunity we can to say we are not going to pass additional legislation, or whatever form, whether it's funding, whether it's Ukraine aid, whatever it is, until we get this border secure. And the only way we're going to get the border secure, because we have a lawless administration, is we've got to tie what the administration wants, whether it's Ukraine aid or funding, to a real secure border. To a border that goes down to the number of people crossing and staying is down to where it was when Trump was president. We can all do this. Now, we're also talking about, as you know, we're talking about funding. Let's look at what we did in the omnibus a little over a year ago. And this is why people in the country are furious with us. They're furious with Congress over spending. We have $34 trillion of debt. We added $1 trillion of debt, right, just since September. Our GDP is growing slower than our debt growth. It's not sustainable. We're not going to get inflation down. We're not going to get interest rates down. None of this is coming down. But here's an example of some things that were in last year's omnibus bill. $3.52 or $3.62 million for the Michelle Obama Trail in Georgia. If you go to my state, you think people say, oh, man, that was a good expenditure. How about $1.8 million to pay for the bus fare of people in Olympia, Washington? So they don't have to pay bus fare. You think people in Florida think that was good spending? $7 million for staircases in the city of the fixed staircase in the city of Pittsburgh. Why should we be funding that at the federal level? $2.5 million for a Chinatown arts building in San Francisco. People are furious with this stuff. So why don't we start doing our job? Secure our border, and we can balance our budget. We do it personally. I did when I was governor for 8 straight years, even though I walked in with a big budget deficit. We're going to start doing the exact same thing here. Let's live within our means. Let's start solving the problems of this country. One of the biggest problems is an open southern border. Now we're going to have Rick Bob Whitmer.
There's an expression that if everyone's family, no one is. There's a corollary to the federal government. If everything is federal, then nothing is. When we're so busy funding the reconstruction of a random staircase in some city, or paying the bus fares for residents of another city, and we're doing all sorts of things the federal government was never intended to be doing or fund. All of a sudden, we find that the few things that the federal government is in charge of doing exclusively can't reasonably be accomplished because we're so spread out doing so many things. I want to make very clear, clear up a misconception that has been widely disseminated. The humanitarian and rule of law crisis unfolding along our southern border, and it truly is an unprecedented humanitarian crisis, is not there because of a lack of adequate federal legislation. Now, sure, our immigration code is a mess. A lot of it was developed over a long period of time through the Buddy Holly era and a little bit since then. And some things need to be tightened, no question about that. But President Biden has every authority that he would need. He has plenty of authority today to secure the border. The reason this is happening is not for want of adequate federal legislation. It's for a lack of will to enforce that legislation, or better said, a willful desire to not enforce that legislation. Let's just look at a couple of things. First of all, asylum. A lot of this started through the asylum process, when these uncontrolled waves of illegal immigration commenced on or about January 20, 2021, the day that Joe Biden was inaugurated President of the United States. A lot of those were processed through the asylum process. They were said to be asylum applicants. It's important to remember that there is no cognizable unconditional right to asylum under federal law. It is rather a discretionary grant of authority to the Secretary of Homeland Security, who may grant asylum to those who qualify under the standards that we have under federal law. There are corresponding requirements that anticipate that when we have more asylum applicants than we have, there's no obligation to just say, okay, well, you're here, so we're going to write down your name on a piece of paper and send you off into the interior of the United States after buying you a plane ticket, allowing you to board said plane without identification, without a passport, a driver's license, or anything else telling us who you are. And we'll give you a little slip of paper that says one day you'll be called up for an immigration hearing. I can't tell you when that will happen, but maybe a decade or more, maybe 12 years for that matter, before you get it. In the meantime, have fun. And by the way, within short order, you'll receive a work permit. There's nothing in federal law that says that that is the answer. In fact, federal law contemplates that if we run out of bed space, as we quickly did right after Joe Biden took office, because he shut down the Remain in Mexico program, litigated it, was ordered by a court to reinstate it, then he drew it, ran out the clock, and is to this day refusing to comply with that court order. His response is, oh, let's just let him go. But there is no reason why he has to do that. When you hear him speak, you will hear him speak in terms that will lead you to think that all of this is the inevitable, inexorable result of federal law that leaves him no choice but to unleash 10 million illegal immigrants on the American people. Now, this is his choice. He has chosen to do this. This was willful. Remember what was asked to his Homeland Security Secretary around about the time Joe Biden took office. I think it may have been even before Secretary Mayorkas was confirmed by the Senate, somewhere in that time frame. Somebody asked him, what would you say to those traveling up through these caravans? And he could have, I wish he would have, said something like, don't come, follow our laws to do that, apply for asylum outside the United States, go to the U.S. Embassy, figure out what your options are, but don't just walk up here and enter in violation of our laws. No, he didn't say that. He instead said, it may take us a few weeks to become fully prepared to accept you. During that time, they had a lot to do, like shutting down the Remain in Mexico program, which had previously been negotiated to require people who enter by land without documentation at our southern border, presenting themselves as asylum applicants, to remain in Mexico during the pendency of their asylum applications. To this day, President Biden could and should reinstate Remain in Mexico program. He could also direct his Homeland Security Secretary, reminding him of the may-shall distinction, that this is only a may grant of authority and not a shall grant of a duty. That the answer when you're overwhelmed, when you don't have enough bed space, when you don't have enough immigration judges to adjudicate these things, the answer is to shut the thing down. Stop taking them in, stop paying for their plane ticket, moving them to the interior. Think about how twisted this is. If any of you have traveled outside the United States within the last few years, you know how critical that passport is. You lose the passport while you're outside the country, happens all the time. You're from constituents all the time. you're not getting back in easily. It's gonna be a long slog. You're gonna have to figure out a way to get a passport granted, or it's gonna be tough to get back in the United States. These guys are not US citizens. They've never paid US taxes. They have no claim to this as their homeland. They're allowed in. We don't know who they are, but in some cases we do. You know, it's nothing short of terrifying that during this administration, 279 known terrorists have been admitted into this country, along with the 10 million illegal aliens who have come here. Now, the Biden administration will brag as if it were a feat of great accomplishment that they've deported 5,993 illegal immigrants entering this country unlawfully during their time in office. Sounds really impressive until you do the math, and you realize that they've released 99.7% of everyone coming into this country illegally. Don't tell me this is for want of federal legislation. This is for want of an utter, defiant, lawless refusal to enforce our border. Finally, do not fall for the mistake that this is somehow wrong. This is somehow xenophobic and intolerant not to allow anyone who wants to come into this country. Or that it's discriminatory against the ethnicities of those who might be coming. It has nothing to do with it. I lived and worked among the poorest of the poor on the U.S.-Mexico border in southern Texas, in the McAllen, Texas area, 30 years ago. Even then, long before there were these huge waves of uncontrolled illegal immigration, I lived and worked among the poorest of the poor, many of them recent immigrants themselves, some documented, some not. No one fears uncontrolled waves of illegal immigration more than the poorest of the poor, recent immigrants themselves, documented or not, living on or near the U.S. border. It is their homes, it is their neighborhoods, it is their children's schools, it is their jobs that are most put at risk by this. This is wrong. Look, we are a nation of immigrants. We're also a nation of laws. We can be both. I hope and demand that we always will be. And to that end, I tell President Biden, secure the border or shut it down. We're not going to continue to fund your government as if nothing had changed when we've got this crisis unfolding on monumental proportions. But whether it's all of government or just the White House toilet paper budget, I don't know. But there have to be consequences for him doing this. We hold the power of the purse, we can do that. Somos una nación de inmigrantes. Somos también una nación de leyes. Podemos y debemos ser los dos.
We're gonna bring Representative Burchett up. I'm gonna ask to step right out. Thank you.
Thank you all. It's 435th most powerful member of Congress. I never get to go at the front of the line, but I have a committee meeting. I appreciate the members allowing me to do that. Senate, and thank y'all for your hospitality. Just some simple numbers. I'm a simple guy. 8 million folks. That's basically the population of the great state of Tennessee and over half the states in this country. That's what the Biden administration has admitted it's come over the border in the last 3 years. 100,000. You've got a soul in your body. 100,000 children are unaccounted for. Who, God knows what horrible life they're either in the sex trade or whatever those godless cartels are doing. The amount of money, over $150 billion a year, low end of what it costs to house, to medicate, to do whatever that we need to do to educate these folks. And I guess the final thing is that we need to remember no border, no budget. That we hold this country's purse strings, and we ought to get some guts and exercise it. Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Thank you, appreciate it. Representative Boone, please step up.
Thank you to my friend Congressman Matt Rosendale from Montana and Senator Scott for organizing this. You know, of all the crises that this president has created, under which this country is suffering, as we continue to suffer under the Biden, Pelosi, Schumer policies that are in place from a year ago, that are destroying the country, the spending levels that are bankrupting the country, you know, between the energy crisis, between the weakening of our military, what's going on in our education system, the assault on our values and our freedoms, the weaponization of the government against its citizens, so many crises created. I would submit that the greatest immediate threats are our debt, unprecedented level of debt, and the open border, Biden's open border. So we've got $2.5 trillion deficit, $200 billion a month, never happened before outside of COVID in this country. $34 trillion of debt, on our way to $36 trillion by the next election. 40-year high inflation under which the American people are suffering. The average family is paying about $1,000 a month for the essentials, the basics, and then we're paying when this president got into office. We've got interest rates that are further exacerbating that 20-year high. The people are suffering. And do we, as a Republican Party, as a House majority, and our colleagues in the Senate, certainly the people that are with us here today, do we really care about that? How does it matter, and what are we prepared to do to deal with that? Furthermore, with the border, 10 million illegals invading our country, not allowed by this president, helped by this president. 170 different countries. A couple million of those being what we call the criminal God base, the ones who don't want the free healthcare, the free social services, the free travel, the free housing, the free education, the ones that are on our plane when we fly back from the border without going through the same checks that we have to go to get on a plane, by the way. No court date to appear. Just go where you want to. We'll get in touch with you later. Literally, that's what it says on their papers. Irreparable harm having been done to the country. A Hamas-like situation, almost a certainty if we close the border today because of who we've led into this country. They acknowledged to us when we were at the border just last week, they don't know where 75% of those, they admit it, they don't know where 75% of the individuals they've led into this country, which is in the range of 8 million, so 6 million they acknowledge, we don't know where they are. They find about 100 dumb ones on the terrorist watch list who come and surrender to Border Patrol like the other 8 million. How many do you think might be dangerous criminals, terrorists among the 2 million? Who are the gotaways? Who don't surrender? Do you think that it might only be 10% are dangerous, so only 200,000 critically dangerous, very dangerous individuals we've left the country? Only 200,000, you think it's only 10%? What if it's only 1%? 20,000, I don't think anybody would take that bet. Took 2,000 to do what Hamas did. And look at what we're allowing every day, 300,000 last month, record level. This president sets records in some things. Fuel prices, inflation, certainly illegals allowed into the country. Not allowed, helped in the country in this president. And so my colleagues and I are here to say, we are prepared to do what's necessary to make a difference. The American people elected us to cut our spending, to restore fiscal stability to this Congress, to save the country, and to secure the border. And we're willing to do whatever it takes. And I yield back, Mr. Roosevelt.
Thank you very much. Next year. Corey Mills, Representative Corey Mills, Florida.
Great state.
Great state of Florida.
Well, thanks everyone for being here. I want to also thank my colleagues from the House as well as from the Senate. It's no mistake what the Biden administration is doing to ensure that this lawlessness and criminality continues to occur at our southern border. Whether you're from the great state of Florida, whether you're from the state of Texas, Arizona, or New Mexico, every single state in America is now a border state. I'm not going to say anything which is eye-opening to what my colleagues have spoken about, but I want to put some perspective around this. In 2018, our cartels were averaging around $500 million in revenue a year. Fast forward into the Biden administration in 2021, and we're looking at around $13 billion in revenue. The amount of people who's come across from the Biden administration, if you couple them all together, is the 7th most popular state in America. You had 302,000 who came across just last month. That is the equivalent of packing the MetLife Stadium, one of the largest professional NFL stadiums, 3 times. That's what we're facing. And if you don't think that this is coupled into our economic failures, you're mistaken. Every single American is facing an increase in medical costs on their insurance, and much of this is a result of the uncompensated medical that is being covered by the hospitals. I'll give you an example of Yuma, Arizona, where on average they have about a $3 to $4 million uncompensated medical cost, which is now seeing the average of $34 to $37 million a year. This is the American people being wrongfully and unconstitutionally forced to pay for illegals who are violating our laws. And it's very simple. The House Republicans can continue to talk about the most conservative border bill that has ever passed the House with H.R. 2 Secure the Border Act, which Schumer and the Democrats in the Senate has refused to take up. But even that aside, we should be enforcing the laws that are currently on the books today. We should bring judges down to the border to ensure that we don't just do the catch and release policies, but we actually go ahead and render judgment and not allow them to be free running around in our country. Under President Trump, the Remain in Mexico and Title 42 helped to quell a lot of the things that was going on. And while we can talk about the needs for immigration reform, which is certainly outdated, we have to address the current invasion, which is going on today. In World War II, we had roughly 150,000 who went in on D-Day. Back then, we called that an invasion. Now you've got 302,000 who are coming across just in this month, but we want to call this asylum seekers. We have cartels and gang members, even terrorists, who are coming across our southern border that is posing a national security, a human rights, and a health issue. This crisis is a crisis in leadership, whether it be Secretary Mayorkas, who I feel should not only just resign, but should be impeached for the crimes of treason, but also the Biden administration has continued to allow this to occur. Let me be clear. Judges are needed to process asylum claims. We need to get rid of the catch and release program. And we need to return to President Trump's remain in Mexico and impeach Mayorkas once and for all to send a message of accountability and the fact that we won't stand for lawlessness. With that, I will hand it back over to Rep. Rosendale.
Thanks very much. Appreciate it. Okay, next up, we have Representative Mary Miller from Illinois. Thank you. Thanks for joining us.
The Biden border crisis is the biggest threat to the country's national security since 9/11. I can't even think of a word to describe it. When I was down there, catastrophe, ruinous. The foreign nationals from hostile countries are slipping into the interior unnoticed on flights that Biden is forcing taxpayers to pay for. Over Christmas, we witnessed illegal immigrants boarding commercial flights without any form of identification, and the Biden TSA put up a sign saying the line was for non-citizen without a passport. That is a slap in the face to American citizens who must present identification to fly. The entire border catastrophe is a blatant disregard for Americans who are footing the bill for the entire housing and healthcare needs for more than 8 million illegal aliens Biden has allowed into the country since January of 2021. Illinois actually is a sanctuary state, rolling the red carpet out, expanding benefits for illegals. Biden and the Democrats have advertised, facilitated, and incentivized this invasion. Last week, after going down to the border with Speaker Johnson, I stayed an extra day to go visit a Texas ranch. Their ranch is being destroyed by illegals. The migrants are coming over by the thousands. The clothing piled up was knee-high. Their pecan trees have been destroyed, and they have found hundreds of bodies this past year on their property. I will not vote to fund the invasion of our country, and I will not vote to fund the government until we shut down and secure the border. We must secure the border or stop funding the Biden government that is orchestrating this invasion. And with that, I yield back to, okay.
Thank you very much, Mary. Representative Kiesel from Texas. Thank you.
Well, thank you for allowing me to be a part of this. I am a freshman. Andy Ogles and Corey Mills behind me are also freshmen. We are here to try to save America. Something is desperately wrong in America, and I know many of you watching at home feel it. Lawless President Biden has allowed thousands of illegal immigrants, as you've heard. Unless we take a stand, then we, the people, will not survive, will not endure. I want to talk to the American people rather than to the press. We need the energy of the American people to descend on Congress. Not more money, not more laws. And the conservatives there in Washington need your help. This past week, I've been watching the aspiring movement of the German farmers, thousands of German farmers who have used their tractors and trucks to assemble across Germany against their government's plans to crush their livelihoods with punishing taxes. And folks, it worked. The German government has backtracked on some of those tax increases for farmers. And now the Dutch farmers are joining them. This is our time in America to build a movement. And I'm talking to the American people. It's amazing what we can achieve with the mobilization of people power against tyrannical governments and authoritarian regimes. We need this same determination from the American people. We stand now, or we stand never. Let's get to it.
Thank you very much. Clean up. Representative Andy Ogles.
Well, thank you all, and to my esteemed colleagues from the Senate and the House. Now, you've heard how our country is being invaded. You've heard about the economic impact. My state of Tennessee alone, almost $1 billion a year. You've heard about the cartels and the terrorists that have come into this country. But over the course of this press conference, as we stand here and speak, and you write your stories and take your photographs, countless numbers of female migrants were raped. Over the course of this press conference, countless number of children, boys and girls, were raped. We've seen how the cartel has monetized the slave trade, the sex trade. We've seen how they weaponized women and children's bodies as a price to pay to come into this country. This crisis at the southern border was created by Joe Biden. And he's historic in that he will be responsible for more sexual assaults of women and children than any other president in human history. Enough is enough. Regardless of your political persuasion, regardless of what you think about amnesty, the systematic abuse of women and children at the southern border can be stopped today. But this administration, this irresponsible and feckless leader that has to be led off the stage by his wife, doesn't have the wherewithal to do his job. So we must hold this government, the funding, and anything else hostage if necessary to protect the innocence that is lost every moment, every minute, every second of every day. Thank you.
We still have, okay, we do have a couple minutes here to take some questions. Anybody, so, go ahead.
So looking at the rule that just went down over on the House side, is this, what kind of statement does this make about how you all feel about the spending caps that we're seeing at this point? And does it just create more chaos to take down an unwritten rule rather than focus more on the spending caps themselves?
So what you're going to start witnessing is the House of Representatives doing whatever we can, taking whatever action we can with the tools that are available to us to let the administration know that they are not going to get additional funding for their priorities until we see a secure border. Would you like to-
You know, by the way, just on the spending side, Chuck Schumer has done nothing to get this spending done. I mean, we've passed all of our spending bills over here, whether we like those numbers or not. We passed the spending bills, and he won't even bring them to the floor. So we can't even work together to try to get spending under control. $34 trillion is that. Additional trillion in the last, 105 days or something like that. This has got to change. But it's all caused by, at the citizen side, Chuck Schumer doesn't care. He wants to do an omnibus and spend money like crazy.
Remember, this is not a victimless crime that we're seeing unfold. A victimless series of crimes to which Joe Biden and his administration are at least accessories after the fact, if not full accomplices. These are not victimless. In addition to all of the human sex trafficking, in addition to the fact that I was down in the McAllen area recently, the Border Patrol agents explained to me that for the first time since the 1860s, we've had, on a widespread basis, indentured servitude in this country in the form of sex slavery. We, of course, outlawed that with the 13th Amendment, but never mind, it's the inevitable, inexorable result of what he's done. Let's also look to the fact that last year alone, a report issued in October of 2023 revealed that U.S. government law enforcement officials had seized enough fentanyl in 2023 to kill every American at least 54 times. To kill something along the order of 3/4 of the world's population if split up and administered in equally lethal doses. Something like 6 billion independently lethal doses. This isn't victimless. And so, yeah, if they take down a rule, you bet they're fighting for that because there are people dying. There are people being exploited. There are people being raped. And the American people are paying for it. They can't bear to see this kind of suffering. Not on their own part, not on the part of those who are being exploited. Meanwhile, we're enriching these cartels to the tune of billions upon billions of dollars a year. Why? Cui bono? Who benefits from this? And what kind of nightmare existence would we have if you didn't have a few brave people in the House willing to take down a rule? If this isn't a good reason to do that, I don't know what is.
And I just want to touch on this, since we're talking about top line numbers. You know, we can sit here and talk top line numbers all day long. The reality is this. We have not just a spending issue, but any business owner will tell you, you get to a size that you can't cut your way to profitability the same way as that America can no longer cut its way to prosperity. We must reform, cut, and grow is the biggest piece of this. So we have to understand, our GDP to national debt ratio is the true issue here. Our continual overspending is the issue. The fact that we don't look to the private sector to drive policy, but government to drive policy that impacts negatively our private sector and our overarching economy as a whole. So we need to get back to understanding, whether it's a 1.59, whether it's a 1.63, whether it's a 2.7, whatever it may be, without an economic growth strategy in place, without passing things like HR1, the Low Cost Energy Act, where we can actually start recognizing that the global currency is energy. It is not the dollar, it is not the yen, it is not the ruble, it is not the dinar, it is energy. And without having that economic growth strategy in place, continuing to do status quo of DC is what's gotten us to $34 trillion, and we can't continue to permit that.
Given that, what happens if Speaker Johnson puts a stopgap government funding measure on the floor as leadership over here on both sides of the aisle are saying is necessary? Like, how do you respond to
The
that?
key word is necessary. What is actually necessary? We've got 85% of the federal government that goes and is maintained anyway, okay? Social Security checks go out. Medicare checks go out. Medicaid goes out. We have veterans benefits that are fully funded and taken care of. We're talking about a very, very small portion of the government that really wouldn't be funded. One of my representatives that couldn't be here because he's tied up trying to conduct business in Judiciary Committee, Representative Biggs from Arizona, is going to bring yet another piece of legislation forward to make sure that we have the proper law enforcement, TSA, and air traffic controllers all funded in addition to those items to make sure that the government can still function. The fact is, we heard about a shutdown of the government, and it was going to cost like $12 billion. We're spending somewhere between 150 and 500 billions of dollars a year because of the illegal immigration problem that we have. It pales in comparison. And that's why we have to take this leverage that we have and try to utilize it to preserve our sovereignty.
Do you have
So what
confidence in Speaker Johnson?
Go ahead.
Are you open to seeing what comes out of the negotiations here with Senator Langford, Murphy, and Sinema, or are you sort of of the mindset that it should be HR2 or nothing?
I think that the conversations that they are having are more about the spending issues than the actual securing of the border. And the conversations that they are having about securing of the border is my understanding that are also being combined with spending in other areas. And I think that is a huge mistake to try and take issues like funding for Israel, funding for Ukraine, and funding for the southern border and tie that all in together. That is not the way we were supposed to pass legislation. And if you recall, we had a long, difficult debate back in January in the House of Representatives, not only to elect a speaker, but to make sure that we reform the rules in the House so that we would be able to have single subject legislation. And I would be glad to have anybody else comment.
Well, it's exactly right. Look, the bottom line is that no American should be told that we must pay and secure the borders of another nation in order to try and negotiate to secure our own. The bottom line is our priority. It's elected officials. I was not elected by Zelensky. I was not elected by anyone other than the people of Florida 7th District and the American people that I represent. We need to get back to the rules in which we agreed upon that Representative Rosendale just talked about, which is single point legislation that addresses all the individual appropriation needs. But again, we are not going to cut our way to prosperity. To put it into perspective, for every dollar that we borrow, roughly 73 cents of every single dollar is just forced into mandatories alone. When we're looking at a $34 trillion debt, we're talking about something around 11 cents of every dollar that just goes to the $844 billion in interest that you're paying per year just to service that debt. And I don't think that anyone can argue that in a time where we're seeing an increase in our adversarial movement because of the weakness in the White House, that China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea are biting at the bit for us to try and not properly, which is why we have to be looking at our military and our defense spending, which covers about 14 cents of every dollar. So when Americans are trying to listen to about what the cuts are, let's put it into perspective of that dollar. We're saying that of the available roughly 9 cents that every single representative has the ability to negotiate on, we're willing to cut 20 to 30% and act as if that is a large cut. It is not. You have to have an economic growth strategy, a reform plan, and we must look at the necessary cuts of programs that are no longer servicing their intended purposes.
So what happens to Johnson if he puts a CR on the floor?
I can tell you, I voted against every single CR and I'll continue to vote against.
Is his
every
job in
single CR.
jeopardy?
I would not say that with this group, our intention is to threaten Speaker Johnson with his job. What we are saying is that we are going to do everything within our power, okay, with the tools that the House of Representatives has, with the Senate, the tools that they have available to them to make sure that we do not continue funding aspects of government until we have a secure border, because that's what our constituents elected us to do.
Do you believe?
I think we can get,
Are you
And
proposing
I would
some way-
say speculating on a motion to vacate is not productive. The issue here is an open border. The issue here is you have blue mayors of blue cities begging for Congress and Biden to shut down the border. So to ask a question about Speaker Johnson, when the issue is the border, is taking you off point. We must secure the border. Remain in Mexico, and if you don't like it, this is our country. We get to decide who comes in. We get to decide who gets deported, and if you don't like it, leave Canada.
you got time for one more question. You've asked already. Go ahead.
Can you explain a little bit more what you mean by use your leverage on the border? Do you mean shut down the government until there's some kind of metric of crossings that has
That's-
come down?
That is exactly right. Until we have measurable improvement of the crossings on the border, okay? We have to get back to pre-Biden administration numbers because this is an invasion. Thank you all very much.
Here's the reason why. We have a lawless administration. That's all I acknowledge. We have an administration that doesn't follow the law. This administration could secure the border. So the only way we can get this administration to do their job is to hold up whatever we can, okay? Whether it's Ukraine funding, whatever it is they want, and say, you don't get that funding unless we get a secure border. Otherwise, any new law, we're gonna get the same result. We're gonna continue to have an open border.
Thank you. Thank you all very much for joining us.
Can all of you go down to the border? Speaker Johnson?
No problem.
Colin.
Yeah, I mean, I just figured.
Thanks, Colin. I'll let them know that,